Hey everyone, it's Lindsay and I'm here today to share with you some more pattern stamping, but this time I'm going to do some Argyle stamping with some foil mixed in. So I'm going to be using this Inspired by Stamping stamp set. It's called Diamonds and it's exactly what it says it is. It's a stamp set of all these diamonds. They have different patterns and there's also different outlines. And then you have all those little bitty stamps, and I have an idea for those, so make sure you stay tuned because those do not go unnoticed. Those can be used as well. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm starting out with the solid diamond. Now you can start out with a pattern one. There's some really great patterns in there, especially like for a Christmas design or anything like that. That would be really awesome. But today I'm using the solid. I'm going to be using 2 colors of ink. And again, you could use 1 color here, you could use 3, 4, mix it up however many you want, but I'm going to be using 2 to keep it nice and simple. The first thing I want to do is stamp out my pattern. So this is going to look like a diamond checkerboard almost when I first stamp it out. So I will just switch back and forth between my inks. Now, in order for my panel to look a little nicer and a little bit more cohesive, I stamped that first row of diamonds off the paper a little bit, so that bottom little section of the diamond is cut off. And I did that so it wouldn't look so put together. You want it to look like a background sheet of paper that has been made and that you've cut. And whenever you cut a piece of designer series paper, whatever you want to call it, it doesn't always have the images directly on there. There are bits and pieces cut off, so I wanted to make it look a little bit more authentic. So this first row, I'm just going to alternate back and forth between my pink ink and also my blue ink. When using a solid stamp like this, you might want to prime it first. You can go back in my Card Making 101 series and see how you can condition your stamps, your solid stamps especially, just so they make a nice solid stamping whenever you stamp them out. I tested mine and mine seemed to be doing okay, so I didn't need to do that this time. So I'm just finishing up now with my last little pink diamond, and it's not going to be much that is stamped on the paper, but I don't want to leave that blank, so I'll go ahead and stamp. And I do have a piece of just plain white computer paper behind my panel, and I also have a piece of fun foam under there just to help with the stamping. Now I'm going to go up above that row that I just stamped, and I'm going to start stamping. This time I'm stamping the blue on top of the pink, and then on top of the blue I will stamp the pink color. So I'm just alternating back and forth here, just doing the opposite of what I did on the last row. You can keep it where you stamp pink on top of pink if you want. That's a really cool pattern too. My suggestion to you would be to go in Google and look up an Argyle pattern and just copy what you see in the picture. And then you have a nice starting point. So it's not so intimidating to really just start out with something in your mind. Now this does get a little tedious, so I'm going to speed this up through the process, but I did want to show you pretty much the entire thing here just because this is a different kind of pattern here. I mean, and it can go so many different ways. Like I said before, you can use 2 colors, you could use 1 color, you could switch it up and use 6 if you wanted to. It really is up to you. Now I am not using a ruler or anything to really line up my stamps perfectly here, so mine are going to go a little bit to the right here. They just happen to start going that way. But that's okay. I'll start adjusting it back over to the left a little bit, and by the time I'm done with this panel, you won't even notice that one of my lines was off. And another thing is, if any of your stamping is off in this pattern, it doesn't have to be perfect because you're going to come back in and you're going to stamp another stamp over this in between the two. So it's kind of going to cover that up and really not make it so obvious. So I'm just finishing up. This is my next to last little line here. And then I'll stamp my final one. Now you can see here that I had that very bottom row hanging off the paper, and now that I've gotten to my top row, my very top of my diamond is hanging off my paper. So it kind of worked itself out really well with this pattern. So now that I have all of that pattern stamped out, it kind of looks like a diamond checkerboard here, but I'm going to take this dash mark diamond. I was going to use this solid line diamond, but then I decided to throw in some foil and I didn't want it to be so exact in case the foil skipped in the process at all. So I decided to go with this dash line. So I'm going to go ahead and load it up onto an acrylic block and pull out my Versamark ink. Now if you just want to use regular ink and stamp another color, that's fine too, but I wanted to do something a little bit different. But I'm going to have to heat set this panel here right now because I'm going to throw some embossing powder over that dash line diamond, and I don't want it to stick anywhere else. This is dye ink that I use, but it can stay wet a little bit and it can have some embossing powder stick to it. So I just did a little heat setting just to make sure. Now I'll be using clear embossing powder. You can use a sticky embossing powder like you see here. I don't ever have good luck with it. This is just basically a powder glue. It can be a little finicky to work with, so I just tend to stay away from it. I can do the foiling with the clear embossing powder, so that's what I use. I went ahead and dusted my entire panel with my embossing bag just to prep my surface. And then I'm going to start inking up this stamp with Versamark ink and stamping right in the center of each one of those stamps. Now this is going to be hard to see because it is clear ink, but just take your time and really look through it. If you hold it in the right light, you can see where you're stamping to. So sometimes I'm getting down on eye level just to make sure it's lined up, and I will just continue to stamp. Now Versamark ink does stay wet for a very long time, so I'm going to go ahead and stamp this first row all at one time, and then I'll go ahead and sprinkle on my clear embossing powder. Now you could probably stamp 2 rows of this. However, that embossing powder, once I sprinkle it on, really helps for me to be able to see where I've stamped my last row. So then I can come back in and line my stamp up. Now I'm just going to line it up on this next row up, and I'm going to connect the bottom of my dash line diamond to the top of the previous one that I stamped on the row below. And again, I am just stamping these right in between 2 of the colored diamonds. Now if you want to make this easier on yourself and the first time you do it, just use another color of dye ink. You could use a brown, would be really pretty with these 2 colors, but I wanted to throw in my foil. Now you can see I am between each row going over and sprinkling on more embossing powder, and that's just so my ink doesn't dry on me and then I have to go back and re-stamp. You can also see that piece of fun foam starting to peek out under my panel. That allows me to just really get a nice good stamped impression. I did this technique as well on my plaid stamping that I did with the Inspired by Stamping Basic Lines stamp set, and that just seemed to really help get the best impression, so I did it on this as well. Now I have my entire panel covered with my embossing powder where I have stamped out those dashed diamonds. And I'm going to go ahead and heat set this. Now whenever you are heat setting this large of a panel, you want to make sure that you let your heat gun heat up for about a minute before you bring it to the paper, so you don't have so much warping. And then I am just keeping a really good eye on it so I don't burn it. Now I have a carrier sheet. It's just a piece of typing paper folded in half, and I have my panel in there. I'm going to be using these Ranger foil sheets. These are not like the Thermo Web or the Heidi Swat foil sheets. These need something sticky to stick to. They will not stick to toner. That is why I use clear embossing powder. You could also use that adhesive powder, but I have a hard time working with that. So I put 2 sheets over that just to cover the entire panel, and I'm going to run this through my laminator, and I have it on the highest heat. I will run this through twice. So I'm running it through this way, and then I'm going to flip it around and run it through the opposite way. Now this is going to melt that embossing powder, and then when it comes out and it cools, that foil is going to fuse to that embossing powder. Now you can do this with the Heidi Swat foils as well as the Thermo Web foils. However, I really love this champagne, and Ranger has some really great colors that you just can't get anywhere else. There you could see that pattern is in that foil once I pulled it out. You want to wait for it to cool so that foil fuses, but there you can see once I pull that off, you've got this nice shiny Argyle pattern that you got to put some foil in as well, and it just adds a little bit of shine. Now to finish off my card, I did a sentiment going kind of catty corner on my panel. I threw some glitter paper behind it as well, and I heat embossed the sending sentiment in white. I also put some stitch lines with a die from Lawn Fawn on the top and bottom of that vellum panel, and that finished off the card. I hope you all enjoyed this video, and as always, I will leave you with just a few pictures. For more information and the supply list, you can head over to my blog, craftingwhilecaffeinated.wordpress.com. The link is in the description box below. Thanks so much for watching, and happy crafting!